Good afternoon. I'm Belinda Matingu, the Business Development Manager for the AWS program to accelerate the growth of startups building solutions for U.S. state and local government customers, AWS GovTech Start. Every day, I have the privilege of helping innovative entrepreneurs who are helping governments meet the needs of their constituents with modern technology solutions built on the AWS cloud. Today, I have the pleasure of highlighting two founders in our program who have built their solutions and added their diverse perspectives and experience to the startup community using AWS. First, let me tell you how AWS helps entrepreneurs overall. As reported by Embroker, 90% of startups fail, and 80% of those failures occur within the first 5 years. AWS has established programs to support founders during these critical early stages by providing resources to help them succeed. For example, AWS Activate provides resources for startups across all industries. AWS Startup Ramp supports participants that are growing their public sector technology businesses. And AWS EdStart supports educational technology or EdTech startups. These are global programs available in the US and other countries around the world. My program, AWS GovTech Start, is available to startups based in the US that are developing innovative solutions for state and local government customers using AWS services to provide secure, reliable, and scalable solutions. Our program launched in January of 2021 and has exceeded our growth expectations as GovTech startup founders have joined our program to accelerate the growth of their businesses. They've benefited from joining our community of mission-driven founders who are sharing their expertise and connections through connections that we've made for them at events that we've hosted, like our Founders Dinners. They have also received education about AWS services from our solutions architects and received technical guidance as they are building their solutions. They've also been able to promote awareness of their business in forums like this, with the 27,000 people who are attending our AWS reInvent. They've also received promotional credit that helps them to invest resources in their business as they are supporting pilots for their customers and testing AWS services. So today you'll hear about how founders of Forcemetrics and WorldSafe First have benefited from our program and bridged the gap in resources and knowledge needed by many founders who are underrepresented in the tech startup community. According to Crunchbase, Black startup founders receive only 1.2% of the $147 billion in venture capital invested in US startups through the first half of 2021. In contrast, more than 13% of the US population is constituted of Black or African American citizens. This underinvestment in businesses started by Black Americans has contributed to the fact that only 4% of the nation's wealth is held by Black households. And the median white household wealth is 7.8 times higher than the typical Black household. One of Amazon's leadership principles states that success and scale bring broad responsibility, and leaders always leave things better than how they found them. In that vein, our AWS GovTech Start program has had the privilege of supporting the inclusion, diversity, and equity objectives of our company by helping underrepresented founders bridge the gap in resources and knowledge that they need for growing successful startups. Now, Andre McGregor, founder and CEO of Forcemetrics, will share how our program helped him bridge the resource gap to creating a successful business. Andre, please join me. Please, Andre, would you tell us a little bit more about your background and how, as an experienced law enforcement officer, you were driven to start your business?
Yeah, I grew up from immigrant parents that came to the U.S. in 1978, and raised in Denver, Colorado. Got the opportunity to go to Brown University, worked on Wall Street. I got the opportunity to be an FBI agent. Went through Quantico and worked a lot of cybercrime as a special agent, and then decided to turn the badge and gun and go to Silicon Valley and see if I can build software to, as I say, make fire retardant material than being the firefighter of going back and forth from cases. And the thing that happened was I was actually taken back from the events of George Floyd. So I'm not usually the type of person to get emotional about a lot of things, because while I was an FBI agent, I was a firefighter and a medic, but I had an anxiety attack. And as I was trying to grapple with my emotions, I realized I wanted to use my skills to some good, and I was able to get a bunch of police departments to say, we need help, and we have a lot of data, and we don't know how to reach the community. And we started Force Metrics.
Excellent. And it was really impactful, the CNN article, the article that you wrote that was published on CNN.com.
Yeah. I was asked by a friend to write out my emotions and what I was feeling. And it turned into an op-ed that was on the cover of CNN.com as my experience as an FBI agent. And it led to a bunch of police chiefs randomly calling me saying, my city's on fire, I'm desperate for solutions. And as I started to talk to them, I realized they weren't asking for solutions for more tasers or rubber bullets or drones. They were saying, we need to connect with the community, and it's no longer one-off situations. We need to understand what the entire community is. And as we started to look through the data, we realized they've collected all this information. They just have no ability to go through it, especially a city like Denver with 1.8 million calls a year. And being able to use AWS services, being able to leverage microservices to be able to scale our environment, and then being able to use machine learning to be able to extract information about mental health calls and dementia and food insecurity and elder care needs is what the police departments are asking for and the community is needing.
And so Force Metrics was born. Would you share a little bit more about Force Metrics and how it helps?
So if you think about how police departments work, someone calls 911. As they're calling 911, there's a dispatcher that's taking a lot of notes. They're sending an officer out. That officer goes in, observes a lot of stuff, and writes that up. And then it gets filed away, and then they go to the next call. And they have an entire system, years and years worth of data, that has never been really accessed. And so we sit on top of that data set. We're on the data layer, and we say, how do we make it easier to digest, identify information quicker to make better decisions about risk and needs to the individual, and then visualize it on a map, because we're visual people. And so being able to make that decision very quickly. And if you think about it, there's only really two industries whereby a single individual has to process a lot of information and then make a decision in minutes and be right about it. One is police officers and dispatchers. The other are doctors and nurses in the emergency room. Everyone else either has lots of time or lots of people to process data.
Yeah. So how did you get started with AWS?
That's an interesting story, because as much as I'm a computer engineer and I've been very comfortable in government, I made it out to Silicon Valley very comfortable in established companies. And as I was coming up with this idea, I decided to open a random an AWS account, and I got a phone call from my account manager, which I didn't know I had an account manager assigned to me. And she was asking me some simple questions, and an hour later, she said, I think I can help you, grow this out and get you a solutions architect to be able to, set up your environment. And we were off to the races. Essentially, the data that we're looking at and the data that we have isn't normal data. This is people that are being assaulted, that are being abused, that haven't gone through court yet. This is beyond credit cards and social security numbers. This must be protected. And it usually takes 6 months to a year to get that adjudicated by the FBI. We did it in 3 months, because we had a great architecture to do it.
Awesome, awesome. So, I think you were working with Katie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and Katie was, and yourself, have been integral in being able to give me not only the motivation, but the courage to know that I can do something more than myself, because without the services that exists in AWS, we would be setting traditional infrastructure up and it wouldn't scale. And now we're in with 4 pilots, cities in Texas, cities in North Carolina. It's great.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a call out to Katie Barufka because she did such a great job in helping you to get started and referred you to our program so that we could work together. So, how have the resources that you've received through the AWS GovTech Start program, helped you to invest in the growth of your business?
Well, the thing that I realized, quickly was, I needed an environment that scaled to a lot of data because police departments have a lot of data. I also needed the ability to create an environment where I'm not immediately going to these cities and asking for money, because if I have it lost in city council meetings and a variety, it'll die on the vine. So by having credits and the opportunity to be able to go to cities and say, I'm not looking for anything but your support and your understanding that data is not here to harm you, it's here to help you, everyone said yes, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without that environment. And then the solution architects being able to help us to understand what we need to put in place to scale, what technologies exist for our next pieces in the roadmap. I'll give you an example. One of the hardest things for being a police officer is typing information into the system. So you have a recent school shooting, as an example. You have 10, 15, 20 officers that are going there and they're responding. They have to come back and write this up before they can give the information to the public, which means it delays and delays information for the victims, it delays it for the public, it delays it for everyone asking for answers. So using something like Transcribe that allows for speech to text to be able for them to enter this information in quickly, now you take something that takes 2 weeks to taking 20 minutes.
That's outstanding, that's really great. And it's really impressive that even though your business is still in the pilot stage, you've got multiple pilots going in different locations, you've already been able to have such an impact on the lives of people.
I make it a point that all of our engineers have to go on ride-alongs. They have to understand how this technology is being built. They can't build it into a vacuum. They need to understand, that something takes 40 clicks. We need to make it 5 clicks. If it's 5 systems, we need to make it 1 system. And it's a great experience because I think, you understand how pulling someone over works, and the fact that, something that should be a 5-minute interaction ends up being 25 minutes. So we've never thought about the idea that technology, or the lack thereof, is an escalator instead of a de-escalator, and what should have been a benign warning has turned into an agitated situation, all because of a technology stack that's 10, 15, 20 years old. And so when we have our engineers that are involved in the ride-alongs and being able to look at how they can deploy new and interesting software into this tech stack, it's eye-opening for a lot of departments, whereas for us in Silicon Valley, we say that's just parity and table stakes.
A normal day's work. Yeah, well, it's really outstanding the fact that you are using data to help police officers, other law enforcement officials to make better informed decisions.
It's not just about police officers and law enforcement officials, it's also about the community asking for transparency and accountability. So by having clear, crisp, concrete data, you now have a good understanding not about the crimes that are happening in communities, which may not be the full story, but the underlying issues and the root causes that led to that assault or domestic. It could have been someone that lost a job. It could be someone getting evicted. It could be food insecurity, childcare issues, and then being able to take that data and provide it to the nonprofit, social services, and faith-based organizations that all want to help, but sometimes don't know how to be helpful. And so when you think about the technologies that we have in our hand for getting food delivered to us, how can we do that for social services? How do we take the phone call that came in crisis and turn it into a service that gets the help for someone that doesn't know exactly who to call?
That's outstanding. It allows for better data-driven decision-making.
Absolutely.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And kudos to you for the work you're doing. So, tech startup founders are typically, like Andre, someone who has a background in technology, or they have a technical co-founder. But the underrepresentation of Black Americans in the STEM fields is another limiting factor for more diverse and Black startup founders establishing successful businesses. Trevor Brooks is the founder and CEO of World Safe First, and he is not your typical startup founder. Through our AWS GovTech Start program, Trevor has been leveraging the expertise of our solutions architects and other experts who develop solutions for government customers to help to build the solutions that are needed by his customers. So, let me introduce you to Trevor Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So, Trevor, would you please share with our audience, what motivated you to start your first business, Gunbail, and what problem were you trying to solve for your community?
Well, I grew up in a pretty unsafe environment consistently, and witnessed a lot of violence, and was in fact served a little bit of my time on earth as a result of an incident of violence, incarcerated. Because I've witnessed so much violence, I would have wanted to make my community safe by removing illegal guns, which I felt were proliferated in my community, and I built Gunbail, which was a way to remove illicit guns out of criminal offenders' possession at scale.
Yeah, and I remember that opportunity meeting you to learn about your first solution, Gunbail. And then how did migrating to AWS after we met help you to grow your business?
Well, being an early non-technical entrepreneur, I realized that connectivity was really important. And early on, we just really couldn't get good connectivity, and we couldn't produce a good product. And it was important because we were a category creator. And when you create a category, you need something that can wow your customer. And the connectivity and the support just wasn't there on the service we were using. So we, after meeting with you and team, we decided to migrate to AWS. Once we got that connectivity, we were able to move with confidence with our products and what our capabilities were, and that helped us gain the credibility of our customers.
Outstanding. And so that led you to building the Home Safe First solution.
Yes. So in building that credibility with our customers, a funny thing happened. They began asking us for solutions. So as we developed a second solution for the city of St. Louis, an anonymous reporting tool, when we were about to launch that pilot in the St. Louis public schools, the schools were closed because of COVID. We were then asked by our customer to, could we respond to the threat of COVID? So we kind of pivoted our anonymous reporting tool in part of our platform to be a reporting tool for COVID symptoms, and then that grew into, teledocking and building a field app and ultimately doing testing and vaccine.
Excellent. So that ultimately allowed you to build the business that has now grown into World Safe First.
Yes.
And were you able to make that quick pivot at the beginning of the pandemic? As you shared, you started with one solution that you built, but then the needs of your customers changed, and in a very Amazonian fashion, you worked backwards from the customer's needs to build out a new solution.
Yes.
Share
So, like I said, we pivoted once, and because of the support of Amazon, we were able to deliver that solution. And shortly after that, we were called to do vaccine and testing on a large scale for a number of municipalities. And we were able to meet that challenge because Amazon helped us, AWS helped us through their solutions architects create things like a 300-man call center in 24 hours, or a COVID-19 testing app where we could test each patient in under 3 minutes and deliver that platform in 3 days. So for a non-technical outfit as we began, we were able to deliver some pretty phenomenal results. And I would like to add, it's just not what AWS helped us with. something unique happened was we had a municipal customer, the city of St. Louis, that we had been pitching to, and we were very close to closing, but it just didn't happen yet. And they had a problem with their servers crashing. And me being there pitching, I learned that they had a problem with their system, so I reached out to our account managers and the business development developer, you, Belinda, at AWS, and they deployed to help our customer solve their problem with a solution by migrating over to AWS. And once our customer saw that support, even we being a smaller outfit, they saw that we had much larger support, and they then closed our first municipal contract, and it evolved into an innovation contract with that city.
Outstanding. That's great. So, with the work that you've done, growing World Safe First, how have you been able to impact the community? Because I know that's really the heart of why you started your business, because you wanted to save people's lives.
Yeah. So an interesting thing happened. When we were asked to pivot to COVID, the first community that we had to engage with around St. Louis, and in particular Ferguson, Missouri, a community that in just recent years had been through a lot of turmoil, okay? And so it was a community very mistrusting, but they needed help. And at that time, I remember speaking with the circuit attorney of St. Louis and realizing that 100% of the people that had been hospitalized and or died from COVID, and this is in early February, March of 2020, were all of African American descent. Every single one at that time in that state, and the numbers were staggering. And at that point, I decided to focus on the minority communities, because what I noticed is that there was a lot of response in other communities, but not so much in the disadvantaged communities, if you will. So we focused on that community, and we had to begin with Urdu, right? Languages like Urdu. Just different people from different lands that were all minority, that were afraid and that were being impacted by this virus. So that's where we started at, and we kept going across multiple states, seeking disadvantaged communities and helping them, helping to test them, to make them aware, and then ultimately helping to make them resistant towards the virus.
And that's how you ended up working, doing a lot of benefit for the state of Florida and many cities in Florida as well.
Yes, we ended up serving about 6 or 7 cities in South Florida, and a population of close to 1 million people that we've been able to serve through our platform. We're still there. Every day we've built a trusted brand, and we've been able to expand that into sustainable solutions with that state and other customers.
Yeah, excellent. And it's interesting because you're doing so much to provide that service to those communities that have been underserved. I believe you have the distinction of being the only Black-owned business in Florida that's doing that type of work. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, funny thing happened. We realized that we were the only African-American vendor, CDC licensed vendor in the state of Florida that could administer vital vaccines to the minority community, and we jumped right to work. We were supported by the governor in his office, and we were able to make an impact. And an interesting thing happened. Shortly after we began vaccinating, the emergency management system of the state pulled out a vaccine. But we, being placed in minority communities, still knew the number was well below. So we chose, the company chose to give back, and we decided to keep the vaccine sites open for an additional month and a half. And the company paid for it. And we were able to vaccinate close to another 1,000 African-American people or people from the diaspora that live in South Florida that would not have been vaccinated. And we like to think that we save even more lives in a much more direct way, during that time.
That's really outstanding, the impact that you're having. So now, you've done so much good work there, but I think you're going back to your original passion, which is, your initial mission to protect people from violence.
Yes.
And you're working with, I know, the Circuit Attorney's Office for the City of St. Louis
Yes.
to fulfill an innovation grant. Would you share a little bit more about that?
Yes. So our overall mission is to save lives. However it is, it began with gun violence, but working with AWS has broadened my horizons to World Safe First, and that's how we changed it. And now we are back in public safety again, as you mentioned, and we're building out a witness intimidation and protection platform for the Circuit Attorney's Office under the auspices of an innovation grant from the Department of Justice. And that's very important to me personally, as in some of my previous experiences, as I told you before, I was once a ward of the Department of Justice, and I strongly feel that a way to change that, to keep less people like me out of the Department of Justice's system, is to have more people like me helping to create the system.
Yeah,
And that has better understanding of the individuals.
Yeah.
So that is good for me. And what it does, what it will do for victim services. And we're taking it up a notch because AWS, and we have access to some pretty cool technology. So we're going to add some real good features in that's going to make a lot of people safe for many years to come. But I can't, tell you.
Of course. And this will be something that will be available across the United States because it's being supported at the federal level so that it can be provided to the district attorney's offices in
Yes.
many different locations.
Yes, it'll be everywhere. And people will be saved and people will feel safer, right? We have identified in our company what our real mission is. And the real mission is to make people safe. And we know that comes in many forms. Some communities need to stay safe and some communities need to get safe. We know where to split that road into, and with AWS's help, we've been able to create solutions that can solve those communities' problems of being safe. And if you're safe, then you're not dying. So that's our mission.
Yeah, oh, outstanding. I know that you also like to give a little bit of a shout out to the person who's worked a lot to provide some of the technical expertise that you've benefited from. So if you would like to share a little bit about that.
Yes. So I am very grateful. I've learned so much from one of the smallest dynamos I've ever met, Ms. Hina Raval. In fact, interesting story. My company was originally named Home Safe First. And I was at a AWS event, and another bigger potential client at the time, which I didn't realize, asked me, could my system do something that my system couldn't do at the time? And I went to respond no, and Hina said, absolutely you can, and she explained to me how. And she brought, the thing about building in your mind is sometimes you reach a ceiling, right? Because everything looks perfect, and sometimes you need someone with more experience to help you broaden, and that's exactly what she did with AWS. She helped me realize that it wasn't Home Safe First or gun bail, and that I was not in the car business or the skateboard business. I was in the transportation business, and that it wasn't Home Safe First. As she put it directly, AWS's broad vision, high level, would be World Safe First, because we would save lives all over the world in many different ways. And the very next morning, I changed the name of the company. That kind of impact is even deeper than whatever technology I can use, much in the way that you help convince me that it would be beneficial for my company to migrate over to AWS and to take benefit of the services when I had one company, and now we have 5.
Awesome, outstanding. Well, I know that that vision of World Safe First has spread to benefit people in many different areas, even now outside of government customers. For example, the work that you've done with maritime operations and
Yes.
cruise ships, and the work that you're doing with aviation customers and so forth.
Yes. So, funny thing, World Safe First really is turning into World Safe First, and we kind of like to thank Land ASC, right? So, as we were vaccinating, we partnered with a group of doctors from the American Board of Emergency Medicine, and us and those doctors received the opportunity from the Clear Maritime Association to vaccinate all of the cruise line workers and employees all over the place. So that was great. And we've also recently gained a teaming partnership with a company that has won an airport construction contract, and we will be supplying IT services, point of sale, and a lot of other stuff I really can't tell you about either. But we seek to revolutionize the airport retail and concessions experience, and then scale that, internationally.
Yeah, outstanding. And all of this being a non-technical founder, leveraging our network and your network really effectively. So I know that you're working to change that. So if there's any thoughts that you want to share about what your vision is for how you bring more people into that network, please.
The best way I could put it, an example I want to make is, I may have had one of the biggest knowledge gaps in this kind of space, but it's just looking at it differently. So I would like to encourage other people like me who may have made mistakes, and even if they haven't, they just hadn't had the opportunity, who thinks that it's a big hill. Amazon shortened the universe for me. They shortened the technical universe for me. And without having to take that learning curve, I can concentrate on what I'm good at. And what I'm good at is building relationships, seeing connections, and realizing the sequence of solutions.
Yeah.
And I have Amazon for the technical support. So it's nothing that we can't do. And we truly believe that, because we've done so many different things so rapidly because of the support of AWS. Using a lot of AWS tools, I must admit, but they're there for the customers. That's what they're for, and we just take advantage of that.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much. That is really wonderful. I know that you're also, working in Southern Florida with understanding more youth in underserved communities,
Yeah.
to encourage them to get into tech and potentially types of startups like the types that you've been
Yes.
building. So kudos to you for that work as well.
Thank you. I mean, we work with me and most of our staff come from an accelerator background, and we always seek to help other founders and people seeking to make a change. And it's kind of like you become a natural mentor when you struggle your way through and you're successful at what your mission is. You become knowledgeable in that space, and you can't help but mentor. So I'm looking for every young or older or minority who thinks that it's a big hill, right? And I think that I can help them, much as yourself and AWS helped me realize that the universe is much shorter, right?
Yeah, well, I have to say, you are a natural mentor. It happened at our founders' dinner last night, where one of the new members of our program was speaking with you, and I heard you launch into examples of things that you had tried to do that he was on the path of doing, and you said, well, you might find that this other way of approaching that would be a little more successful for you because I went on the road that you were on, and it
Yes.
helped me to move in a different direction. So.
Yes. Well, you know what they say, right? Knowledge comes from experience, and experience comes from failure. And we failed our way here, and we reached success, and since then we've had nothing but success.
That's outstanding. Well, kudos to you. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Excellent. So you can see now why I'm so proud to work with Andre, work with Trevor and their teams, their amazing teams, and my amazing colleagues, Hina Raval and Brick Flammer, who's the program manager for AWS GovTech Start, and our fearless leader, Katie Heritage. We really enjoy the opportunity to enable startup founders and the many founders that are members of our program, and take special pride in, as Trevor said, having people who really have had the experience of how they need government to work more effectively for all people, and developing the solutions that government needs so that they can better serve all their constituents. So thank you very much for sharing your stories, and we look forward to having you, ask any questions that you may have of Trevor or Andre after the session, just in respect of the COVID protocols. So thank you all.